Paula Crenshaw. I'm an internist at Barton. Internist is an adult medicine specialist. And I came from Boulder, Colorado about 6 years ago. My undergrad degree is in kinesiology, which is exercise physiology. I've always been very interested in fitness, health, weight loss. I own a gym down in Cameron Park, an Anytime Fitness gym. And I'm always talking to people about health as much as I can. And probably the number one complaint I hear in the office is, I'm fat and help me lose weight. Or I'm stuck, I can't lose weight. And it's just a really common problem that we see. In the United States, obesity is rising to epidemic proportions. I read a study recently that estimated that children born today, if they continue with the same levels of obesity that we're seeing in children today, they will, their parents will outlive them. That's a pretty disturbing thought, that children are obese. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. Probably food portion sizes are responsible, types of food, additives to food, types of sugars that are added to foods that we don't even realize are what we call simple carbohydrates, and inactivity. Children today don't move as much as children of yesterday in general. They play video games. They watch a lot of TV. When I was young, and maybe I'm dating myself, I rode my bike and climbed trees and ran around and got hurt a lot because of all the sports that I did. And all of us, can probably remember when we were children, or a lot of us, and we could eat anything we wanted and never gain any weight. So over the years, a lot of people have thought that weight gain is natural as you age, and we'll talk a little bit about what a healthy weight is, because there's some new research on that. But weight gain doesn't have to be inevitable as we grow old. But there is some new interesting research coming out on weight that I think you'll be interested in. One of the things we always have to talk about is, how does your body make fuel? So one of the diagrams that I use, and any of you that are my patients that maybe have a risk for diabetes have seen me outline the way that our body uses fuel. All food, everything we eat is converted to glucose, whether it's a steak, a candy bar, fat, or whether we take pure glucose, it's not converted. Sugar converts really rapidly to glucose. And glucose, the best way to think of it is it's our gasoline. In order to get our gasoline into the gas tank, which are our body cells where it can be used for energy, we need a gas hose. And the best way to think of the gas hose is insulin. Insulin is a hormone, and its role is to take the glucose in our bloodstream and move it into the body cells where it can be used for energy. If we can't get the energy into the cells, or we have too much blood sugar, then we convert it to body fat. And body fat, you can think of it as, at a gas station, the underground storage tank. So we're much like a car in a way, very similar. In type 2 diabetes, there's a problem with getting the glucose into the body cells. it's as though the gas hose is blocked. It's primarily a genetic condition. And it's genetics, age, and typically weight gain will worsen it, because the more what we call in medicine adipose cells, but lay people call fat cells that we have, if we have a tendency toward what we call type 2 diabetes, is they make us more resistant to our insulin. So we have lots of insulin. And what happens when we have type 2 diabetes is that we can actually become fatter at a time when we really want to lose weight, because the more fat cells we have, the more resistant we are to our own insulin. But type 2 diabetes, a lot of people don't realize, is the most inheritable type. And as a result, you really, if you have it in your family, grandma, mom, dad, brothers or sisters, you really want to watch your weight as you get older, because you have a genetic tendency toward it. It's very inheritable. And as you get older, that gene may get turned on. Some people, that genetic predisposition to diabetes is so huge that even though they exercise, they keep their weight down, and they do all the good things for themselves, they're still going to develop it. Other people can avoid it just by keeping their weight down and exercising. So one of the things I want to talk about, this isn't a lecture on diabetes at all. I just want to mention some of the things that are issues. But one of the things I want you to realize is how we were designed as a primitive creature. So what I call caveman metabolism. And when you understand what your body is trying to tell you when it gains weight, loses weight, plateaus, you'll understand a little bit more about how you can work with your own body. But over 1 million years ago, when we came into the world, we came into a world where food wasn't readily available. We were in a situation where sometimes we were starving, food wasn't available. Other times food might be plenty. Perhaps you'd go through a winter, not much to eat, and then you'd have a hunt for the woolly mammoth, and you'd be able to eat all you wanted and store some of that food. Well, our body was adapted to that environment, and it still is adapted to that environment, and it doesn't know that we have food available in every corner, and that we have calorie-rich foods also available. So we're actually designed to maintain our body weight. For a couple of decades, they've bounced back and forth about whether set points of weight really exist or not. And I think where we're moving to in research is realizing that set points in the body do exist, and we'll talk about those. In other words, if you're at a certain weight for a while, your body decides that that's the weight that you should be at, and it sets it at that weight. And what's going to happen is when you try to lose weight, your body is going to sense that it's a threat. And it's going to say, this organism is going to die. I don't want it to lose weight. That's the plateau. That's what happens when you plateau. That's what happens when you're just frustrated about your weight. So weight loss is sensed as a risk to survival. It's really very simple. Now, fight or flight is the way that we were designed to be able to tap into our energy stores. So remember, going back to, we have that gas storage tank. So we have the fat cells where energy is stored. When we needed energy, we needed to be able to mobilize it very quickly and to get it into our bloodstream. So when we're presented with a threat, what happens is we have hormones in our body that cause us to convert our fat stores into glucose, so we have immediate energy. These days, we don't often have to run away from a threat. Sometimes we bottle it all up, and that's stress. Stress is still a threat. And when you're stressed, those stress hormones can go up, and sometimes they're going to actually kind of screw up your ability to lose weight too. Let me give you an example. They found that people who work nights, it's not a natural rhythm for them. You have a hormone every day that's excreted twice. It's called cortisol. Anybody heard of cortisol? Cortisol is a stress hormone. In the morning, when you get up, before you get up, around 5 or 6 in the morning, cortisol begins to go up. That hormone goes up because it's there to prepare you for your day. So it's going to mobilize some glucose from your fat stores so that you're ready to go for the day. It also will raise your blood pressure up a little bit, and that's why most heart attacks occur in the early morning hours, is that little rise in the cortisol that sometimes can be a stress on the heart. People's blood pressure can go up, but that is one of the reasons most heart attacks occur in the early morning hours, is because of that stress hormone that's going up. If you don't eat in the morning, so how many people have heard that if you don't eat breakfast, you'll tend to be fatter, that you always want to eat breakfast? I mean, it's sort of a mantra we tell people, and yet a lot of people don't eat breakfast. But the reason for that is that if you get up in the morning and you start about your day and you don't eat breakfast, what you just told your body is you don't have any food. And when your body doesn't have any food, it's going to try and get you to get food. And so what happens when your body thinks you're starving is there are hormones that begin to be released that are going to make you want to eat more. There's appetite hormones, ghrelin, leptin. If you've heard of any of those, we didn't even know about those a decade ago. Those are appetite hormones. They begin to go up. Your body now is primed that any food that you do begin to take in later in the day, it really wants to use it, and it really wants to store it as fat. So you've told your body you're starving and that it needs to store more fuel as fat because it thinks you're going to starve again sometime later. So it's really simple what our bodies are telling us. It's trying to keep us alive. So when you go on a starvation diet, and everybody's probably tried them, for anybody who has a weight problem from time to time, I know I have in the past, then a couple of days later, you're so ravenous, not only do you want to kill everybody in sight, but you just fall down, you get frustrated, and you eat the entire contents of the refrigerator, plus more, and you go on a feeding binge, and the next thing you know, you've gained everything back that you lost. Same thing happens after you've been sick. How many of us, you know, we women will take weight loss any way we can. If we're really down with the flu and we're really sick, that colonoscopy prep anyway. Your body is going to regain it. It's primed to do that. It says, I need to do this. When we're pregnant, have you ever wondered why women don't have periods when they're nursing? It's a survival mechanism. They don't have periods because the body doesn't want to be fertile. It doesn't want to support a pregnancy and a nursing baby. Women, when they're elite athletes and they're exercising really severely, they're sending a signal to their body that they're stressed, and their body says, I'm going to make this woman infertile. I mean, she's running after the woolly mammoth every single day. I don't want her to get pregnant. It would be a threat to the organism. So it's really pretty simple what your body's telling you, but there are ways to get around it. Okay. So just to go a little bit into some diets, we'll kind of go back and forth here. But we talked about when you take in food and it's converted to glucose. And you've probably heard that some foods do it faster than others. This is where simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates come in. Diet isn't complicated. That's why I like to do my own diabetic teaching on diet, because I try to make it so simple that you don't even have to think about it. Really, what you want to do is you want to eat foods that are closer to the earth, they're less processed. So if you're approaching a food and you're like, is this a complex carbohydrate or a simple carbohydrate? Is it processed? So in terms of whole grains, think about if you walked out of your cave a million years ago, you aren't going to have Wonder Bread, you're not going to have white flour, you're going to have grains that you're going to have to grind up, you're going to have seeds, you're going to have nuts. And all of those foods digest slowly. And as a result, when they digest slowly, your insulin level, remember your insulin level, because it's going to take your glucose and move it into your gas tank, your body cells, it mirrors your rise in your glucose. And insulin, if it cannot get all that glucose into your body, is going to store it as fat. So for years we said a calorie was a calorie was a calorie. It's not really though, because the types of calories that you eat really do make a difference. And when you eat foods that digest slowly, complex carbohydrates, fruits, not fruit juice. Fruit juice is really, the body perceives it a little bit like a soda. It's a sugar, it's fructose, it's very simple, it goes to your blood sugar. But if you eat whole fruit, you're also getting the fiber, and that's going to digest a little bit slower. Your vegetables, your seeds, your nuts, beans. Beans are really an excellent food. Lean meats, what I call game and fish, and poultry. So if your meats are what I call the white meats. In primitive times we had game meats, and they were kind of skinny meats that were out there. I hear a lot about the Paleo Diet, and there may be some passionate people about the Paleo Diet out there. Everybody's passionate about some diet of the year or the decade. And the Paleo Diet says, you know, you should eat like a caveman. But I have a couple things to say about that. Number one, the caveman didn't live very long. The other thing is the caveman lived outside. And one thing that the Paleo Diet can be very devoid of is vitamin D. Because vitamin D, if we look at ancient times, in the world, we were an outdoor species. And we got sun, and we got a lot of vitamin D from sun. And if we didn't live in a sunny climate, like Eskimos, Norwegians, they tended to live near the sea. And the other place you get vitamin D is cold water fish, your cod, your sardines, your salmon. So somewhere in the beginning of the 20th century, they were noting that as we became a more industrialized society, children were getting rickets. Anybody know what rickets are? Bowed legs from vitamin D deficiency. We have a lot of vitamin D deficiency today, but you don't see rickets very often, and that's because children usually are drinking milk, and they're getting it in their diet. But what they did is they began to fortify milk. That's why many of us here may remember the days when our parents said, drink your milk, you know, and it was because it was vitamin D fortified. So vitamin D is a nutrient that if you're on the Paleo Diet, you need to think about getting. We live longer now. Cavemen lived into their 20s, maybe their 30s. There's things that we're experiencing as the human species now in terms of just longevity that we didn't have to deal with in primitive times. The average lifespan of a woman 100 years ago was 47 years of age. Even menopause wasn't occurring to an awful lot of women in those days. Nutrition has actually gotten better because we're able to get more of a variety of food. I guess I'm not close enough to it, but you guys can hear me, right? Okay. So these days we're experiencing things like we're living long enough, we get skin cancer, so we wear sunscreen, so we're not getting the vitamin D. You know, we have a lot more variety in food. So if just a comment on the Paleo Diet, that it's a good diet in that generally it gets people eating more closer to the earth. The meats should be really lean meats instead of fatty meats, but it's a little devoid of vitamin D, and it's just something to think about. I mean, we have changed. So we talked about this, that weight loss triggers the body to slow metabolism. So when people come in and they say, you know I should exercise and I just don't get around to it, I'm really tired and I know I eat too much, what I always tell them is, really we're genetically programmed to sit in front of our cave and eat everything in sight. I mean, that's really how we're programmed. If in the winter we didn't have food very available and something ran by, a little skinny chicken or a lizard or there was, you know, a berry on a tree, we wanted to eat it. It was a survival mechanism. Our appetite would make us want to do that. So pregnancy, we talked about as another adaptation to, we don't want to get pregnant because we die if we didn't have enough food. Anyway, so what happens when we diet? We lose weight. How many people on the first month of their diet will lose like 10 pounds? It's really great. Yeah. So it's like what happens is that the body at first kind of adapts and you lose weight. And it's as though there's a delay in the alarm bells. Nobody's really studied this, but I think it's very interesting because as I've been a physician for 20 years, you know, I've noticed that people will lose a lot right away. The nice thing about that is sometimes that gives you a little bit of incentive to keep going. Your clothes fit a little better. Wow, I lost 10 pounds. You know, so you can kind of get going. But then what happens is the body is eventually going to sense that weight loss, and it's going to slow the metabolism, and your appetite's going to go up. And then what happens is 2 or 3 months into your diet, you're going to hit the plateau. Anybody hit a plateau? It's really frustrating. Really frustrating. What do you do when you hit a plateau? Well, what do you do if you hit a plateau? You give up. But what do you do maybe sometimes right before you hit the plateau? When you're like, okay, what do I do?
You start eating again because you feel like, oh, well, I can. You'll eat more because you're like, oh, I've lost all this, so it's going to take me that much longer to regain it. So you spoil it, you eat.
Well, that's one of the things we do. We're very clever. Yeah, I've been there too. I've been there too. Actually, what a lot of people do, if they're determined they're going to lose, all of a sudden they cut their calories even more and they exercise more. So now they're running like on the treadmill and they're eating less. And you know what we doctors used to say when they'd come in and say, I hardly eat anything and I exercise all the time and I can't lose? We go, yeah. But actually, you know what? They weren't lying to us. And the reason is your body's adapting to it. It's meeting you calorie for calorie. It's very sneaky. Okay? So you're exercising more and you're eating less, but what your body is doing is it's making the appetite hormone go up and up and up, and it's trying to slow and slow and slow your metabolism, and it's hanging on to those pounds. There's another thing happening. My husband, that's Greg over there, the other day, we needed something for our gym, and usually we order online, but we had to go to this facility down in West Sacramento. And on the counter, they had 2 globs of material. One was this big and one was this big. And he finally asked the clerk what it was, and she said, well, pick it up. And he picked it up, and they weighed the same. They both weighed 3 pounds. And he said, well, what is it? She said, this is muscle and this is fat. So when we start exercising, if we're adding that exercise, our muscle is getting bigger, and muscle does weigh more than fat for the same volume of fat. And we begin losing fat and we're gaining muscle. So sometimes we're meeting ourselves weight for weight. I started this workout program called P90X. Anybody heard of it? So P90X, I couldn't believe it. I'm working out every day, like an hour, really hard. I'm exhausted every night. And I'm not losing at all. But I look in the mirror and I don't have any flab left, and you know, things are definitely toning up, but I'm not losing, and I just can't even believe it. And I mean, and I know all this stuff, but you know, it didn't occur to me because I'm also a woman, and if the scale isn't moving, we're just like desperately upset about it. But anyway, fat doesn't convert to muscle, and muscle doesn't convert to fat. When you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was really buffed and really muscular, and now you look at him and he's overweight. I don't know, I haven't seen pictures of him lately. It's not that his muscle converted to fat. It's really that he lost a lot of his lean muscle. Muscle, if you don't use it, like a bicep, it's going to get bigger when you use it. When you don't use it, it's going to shrink. And fat will come in like a marbled steak, and we're going to get fat that's in the lean, and we're going to have fat that may fill up the space, but one type of tissue doesn't convert to another type of tissue. Does just one gets smaller and the other gets bigger. So one of the things is we might want to sometimes think about, our weight loss and look more in the mirror instead of just on the scale. So overcoming the plateau, how do you do it? There's some programs out there that have figured this out. One of them is Weight Watchers, but there's a lot of other programs. And what they figured out is that there's ways that you can sneak under the body's sense that you're losing weight, under the radar is what I call it. And it's about 200 less calories a day than what you need to take in. So about 200 calories less a day than what you need will result, usually, on average, between 1 to 2 pounds of weight loss a week. And we've all heard that that's a healthy goal. And it's true, if we lose about 1 to 2 pounds a week, we lose it slowly, our body generally, we're going to be more successful in the long run in weight loss if we lose it slowly. Even then, people on Weight Watchers or any other good diet program, a lot of times will still reach that point where they plateau and they get frustrated. So following a diet plan has actually been shown to make people more successful. There's been research on how people are successful at weight loss. And I like to read everything out there that I can. And so when people come in to me, I tell them, you need to follow a formal program, whatever it is, because when you track your intake and you track how you're doing on your weight loss, you're generally more successful. So people who come in and they just say, I'm just going to cut down or I'm just going to change the type of foods that I eat, it's not that that doesn't work, but it usually doesn't work. So they really studied how people are successful. They've also found that one nice thing about our gadgetry these days is that when people are very invested in their weight loss, when they're thinking about it and they're tracking what they're eating and they're writing it down and they're engaged in their program, they're more successful. The other thing they found is that if you make friends with your scale, in other words, you use your scale a lot, you'll be more successful. One area I don't agree with Weight Watchers is I don't think people should just weigh themselves once a week. They want people to do that because you have daily fluxes in your weight and they don't want you to get on the scale one day and notice that you've gained 2 pounds. So if you wait till the end of the week, you're more likely to register your weight loss. But in fact, even getting on the scale completely naked after you've eliminated your bowels and your urine and you have nothing on and your stomach's empty, you still may know that one day you're 2 pounds or sometimes even 3 pounds more than you were the day before. And that's because we have salt and water in our body and sometimes we retain some fluid and sometimes we're down a little bit. So I tell people when you get on the scale, have the yellow zone and the red zone. And the red zone is when you get 4 to 5 pounds. That's probably real weight gain. So if you pay attention to it, you're less likely to put the weight on. So if you're at a point in your diet program where you've plateaued, just make sure you don't gain. If you've been losing weight and you have a big vacation coming up, don't gain. However, the interesting thing is that you sometimes can get away with pigging out for a short period of time and your body won't punish you for that. The other interesting thing is there are people out there that are what we call self-regulators. There's probably some in this room. They don't ever think about what they eat and their weight never changes. And they've studied these people in the lab. And they've studied them, and what they found is that they can put them in a lab environment and they can force feed them to gain weight. And then when they let them go, they self-regulate and they just eat less. Lucky people, but a lot of us aren't like that. And that's led the scientists to wonder, is there something that changes in the brain? Do we become immune to knowing when we're full and we have adequate calorie balance? There have been research, is it a virus? Is there a virus out there that makes us fat? You guys have probably heard these things. Nobody knows. There's probably a lot of things going on in our brain. Personally, what I think happens is that we become a little bit immune. We're so used to a lot of food being around that we're used to overeating. How many people have lost weight and they've kept it off for a while and they're doing really well and they're eating not very much, and then they sort of gradually start adding a few more calories, and the next thing you know, you're kind of eating the way you used to eat, and you know you shouldn't, and the weight starts coming back on. But what seemed easy right after the diet to sort of maintain that reduced calorie intake suddenly is just off again. So something happens, either age or whatever, or we somehow become immune to those internal signals. Nobody really knows. So here's some disappointing evidence. We'll talk about good things too. So there's been a study that was done within the last, I think I first read it probably a year ago, and it was talking again about the age-old argument of are there set points. And what they did in this program is they found that when they had people who had lost weight, so if you took a person who weighed, say, 140 pounds, we'll use women as an example, and you had gained up to 180, and now you've lost back down to 140, but this 140-pound person never gained the weight, they're still at 140, that when you lose the weight, you have to maintain about 20% fewer calories on average for 2 to 3 years before your body will set a new set point. So no wonder we regain weight. Our body's programmed for it. Remember, the caveman. Whenever you don't know what your body's doing and you're frustrated, try and figure out what it's trying to tell you. Again, it is your friend. It's trying to help you to survive. It doesn't know you're in a modern world. And so it's combating that because it's going to try and get you back there. So they don't know how long it'll take for each individual to get back where they were. The good news is that you can make up for that 20% with exercise. And we'll talk about that. So the yo-yo, particularly bad. When you talk about the yo-yo going up and down and up and down, it really is going to get harder each time to lose it again. Your body is totally confused. So that's where making friends with your scale and trying to maintain your weight and not going up and down is really, really important. What is obese? Everybody's seen probably these body mass index charts. They don't really fit for everybody. I mean, maybe you really are a big bone person. Most of us would like to be, but maybe you are. Or maybe you're really muscular, you're an athlete. This may not make much sense. What I tell people when they're trying to lose weight is the first thing I say to them is, what do you think you should weigh? What do you think is a good weight for you? Most of us have a pretty good idea of what we should weigh. I do find people that are very out of touch with what they think they should weigh, but it turns out that most of us probably have a pretty good idea of what we should weigh. And what I'll say to people is, okay, let's make close to that our first goal, and then when you come back in, let's see how much body fat you've got on. I mean, if you can still grab hunks of fat on your bottom, your belly, women get back fat, you know, you're probably still over fat. But here's the other thing, is there's been some research lately that being overweight may not be so bad for us. And about 6 months ago, this study was published, and I think it hit the mainstream media, that actually if we were a little overweight, we live longer. Anybody catch that? So I used to tell people the only advantage to being overweight is that your bones will be better because bones are thicker when they have weight on and they have stress on. That's why you don't see people on crutches as much anymore. They're taken to surgery and their broken bone is pinned, and so they get up and they start moving on it because that encourages bone growth. Well, when you're really overweight, generally your bone density is better because you have stress and weight on your bones. So I would tell people, being overweight is good for your bones, and if you fall in the lake, you won't get hypothermic as quick. But other than that, it's good for you. But maybe that's not so true. We definitely know that when people are a lot older, that maybe weight loss isn't really good for them. Maybe if our our moms or our dads, when they're older, if they're a little overweight, say they're in their 80s, it may not be a good idea for them to try and lose weight. Because their body, especially when they're older, and they're in the sunset years of their life, their body may not respond very well to weight loss, and it may create even more of a stress on them. So there was another study that came out recently. I read all the time. Anyway, and what it did is it compared people that ate a pristine cardiac diet, and they were skinny. So they were skinny, and they ate all the good things that they should. Low fat, lots of fruits and veggies, lots of fiber. They ate really well, took really good care of themselves. Then there was the other person who was overweight, but they exercised a lot. The person who exercised had less cardiovascular disease. So exercise really trumps diet when it comes to longevity. Studied many years ago in Europe. They looked at men. They found men who exercised vigorously, and we'll talk about what's vigorous and some of the new stuff and how much you should exercise, had 50% less cancer just by exercise. Now, I would question, did they also eat better? Maybe there were other variables. Science is funny. You can manipulate science to say anything, but a really good study has a lot of people in it, it's reproducible, and you've tried to control for what are called variables. So there was a study that came out recently, men who took a vitamin pill had less cancer. Well, do men who take a vitamin pill also exercise, eat better, not smoke, and aren't alcoholic? I mean, who knows? They didn't really control for the other variables there. So you always have to look at that. But it turns out that exercise has huge benefits for the things that obesity has going against it. When we're obese, we have more cancers. It turns out that fat cells are what we call pro-inflammatory. Our mood isn't very good, makes people depressed. Studies have shown if you exercise, some studies have shown it's as good as an antidepressant. I'm not always sure I believe that, just from what I see, because I see people that exercise and take good care of themselves, and for whatever reason, depression is a real issue for them. So I don't think anybody who has to take a medicine for depression should ever feel guilty about taking it, but exercise is important if your mood is down. It turns out another complaint that I get is low libido. The best thing for sex is exercise. It trumps drugs. When I'm talking about that, I'm talking about sex drive, not necessarily performance like men when they have Viagra and things, because that's a performance issue, but just sex drive. When we feel better, we generally are more attractive to other people. We like ourselves better. So exercise reverses a lot of the negative things that excess fat tissue. Now, some research indicated that rodents, has anybody read this study? It's been going on for a long time. When they cut calories in rodents by about 10% under what they really needed, that they lived longer, significantly longer. And there are people out there who are so invested in this that they go around every day semi-starving themselves, and they're really, really skinny. Well, they're not rats, and we don't have any proof that that really works in humans. Maybe it will. I don't know what to think. We have two different contradictory pieces of science. One, that if you're heavy, maybe you're going to live longer. One, that if you semi-starve yourself, you'll live longer. When they look at what is the most successful way to lose weight, at 6 months, if you took one group that's doing diet only, calorie reduction, and you take another group who's doing calorie reduction and exercise, at the end of about 6 months, they're about equal. They really are about equal. Now, I wondered about that. Maybe that other group is gaining weight in lean, so their weight loss has slowed down a little bit because that muscle's heavier. It's hard to say. But at 1 year, the exercisers win. And remember when we talked about that 20% reduction. So when you get to your goal weight and you go, oh, I can get away with eating more now, I'll be fine, my weight's down, and it slowly starts creeping on. exercise may be the way to keep you going. Exercise also gives you immediate feedback to how you feel with less weight. Have you ever gone in after you've lost weight and picked up, you know, foodstuffs in the grocery store, like a turkey that's like 20 pounds, and God, I lost that much? You ought to do it sometime. It's kind of interesting. And you think about, you know, how you were carrying that, you know, carrying that around. It's really kind of an interesting thing. Anyway, I love this slide. I've used it in so many lectures. I just love it. Anyway, stress hormones trigger fight or flight. You're going to increase your cortisol. The scale versus the mirror. We've already talked about that. If you're exercising, go by what you look like in the mirror. Don't necessarily be a slave to the scale, but don't forget about the scale because it works. Overcoming the barriers. Formal programs, they do work. #1 rated program is Weight Watchers. I don't have stock in the program. It's just been rated #1 year after year after year. It's a very interactive program. You get to count your exercise, you get to count your food. And again, they've shown that interactive programs help people to keep more success. There's a lot of other good programs. Jenny Craig and Nutrisystems, I call them the dog diet. If your dog needs to lose weight, you just give them a bowl of kibbles and that's all they get to eat, unless they get on the counter. And so somebody's just giving you portions of food and that's all you're eating. Those are good. They're good for jump starts, you know, and they can work. And sometimes paying money for things motivates us. Gadgets, have an iPhone tracking your calories, faithful to the scale, body food and soul food. How many of you heard this from me before? I talk about it all the time. What is soul food? What's Thanksgiving?
Isn't comfort food?
It's comfort food. You know, it'd be easy if we didn't have to eat, you know, if we could just seal our lips shut. But food has so many meanings in our life. And when I'm trying to help somebody lose weight, I tell them, Christmas is free, your birthday's free, and Thanksgiving's free. That's not very many days of the year, but they are free days. Because we all need that. That is a time when food means something different. And even my insulin-dependent diabetics, I will try to help them manage their insulin so that they can be a little freer with their diet on days like that. They can't go whole hog. If they do, they might get into trouble. Body food is food we eat for nutrition that's good for us. That could be soul food. And it's wonderful if all those real healthy foods become things that you like. And in fact, the more you eat of them, you know, the better they are for you and the better they taste, and you start liking those better, you know, than the fatty foods. But I tell people, try to keep about a 90-10 rule. 90% approach your day as though you're approaching a buffet table. And on one side you've got the prime rib and the mashed potatoes and the gravy, and the other side you've got the lean fish and the steamed green beans. And you do this game with yourself. Am I going to be okay with the fish and the green beans today, or am I just so jonesing for that prime rib? I have to have it. I'm not going to tell you that I don't eat like crap sometimes, because we all do, okay? But try to eat really well. It's what you do 90% of the time, and it really does make a difference. Nutrition is really, really key. So we talked about programs. What else works? What about diet pills? What's out there? There's a drug that will keep you from absorbing fat, Orlistat, also known as Ally or LE. Anybody tried it? Anybody want to admit they tried it? You know what happens when you don't absorb fat? You have oily diarrhea. It's really gross. So when it first came out as a prescription product, not that many people came back for repeat prescriptions. I think it's a disgusting drug. And it will keep you, if you took it regularly, it'd keep you from absorbing your oil-soluble vitamins too. But nobody takes it that long, so I've never seen anybody get malnutrition. The most clever use for it that I ever heard was a pharmacist who told me she would take it when she went out to have like a big steak dinner. because she wouldn't absorb it that night. She didn't eat that way the rest of the time, but on that one night she could take it, but she really paid for it the next day. Other diet drugs are designed really to lower your appetite. So speed, amphetamines, they don't increase your metabolism. What they do though is they decrease your appetite. So they make you lose your appetite. Anybody ever take Sudafed, you can't eat all day? You just like buzz, takes your appetite down. Sudafed will do the same thing, it makes some people speedy. So a lot of the diet drugs are designed to reduce appetite. There's some new ones out there. None of them are anything to really write home about. There's a combination now that a lot of us doctors have figured out, and it's an antidepressant called Wellbutrin combined with an anti-migraine drug called Topamax, because Topamax has a remarkable side effect of weight loss, only it causes that usually in the person who doesn't need to lose weight. But Wellbutrin is an antidepressant, but it also has a bit of a stimulatory effect. Wellbutrin is also known as bupropion, that's the generic, and it's also known as Zyban. Anybody know what Zyban is? Anybody know what Chantix is? Zyban was the first stop smoking drug. Chantix is actually a very similar drug to that. It works on dopamine in the brain, reduces craving, and Zyban was the first drug, then Chantix came out. I like Zyban better. I think it's a better drug and a safer drug and better tolerated. But that drug can reduce craving, increase mood, sometimes reduce appetite. Somebody's really stuck, sometimes I'll add a little bit of Topamax. I only let people use diet drugs as jump starts, and they've got to follow with me, and they've got to be doing a diet plan, and they've got to be exercising, because you won't be successful. People that want to have bariatric surgery, they want to have a gastric banding procedure. That's where they just make the stomach smaller by putting a band around it. Or they have bypass. Bypass takes a portion of your intestine out and you don't absorb. Those are desperate means, but you know what? Sometimes they've worked for people and it's been the magic thing, and I have to tell you that my attitude has changed when I've had a few people come back and their life is transformed. They weren't able to lose before. I tried everything and their life is now transformed. But there are also people, because they didn't do due diligence with their doctor and learn how to eat right and try and get better eating habits and try to get exercise on board and start changing the lifestyle that would make them successful, who've been unsuccessful even with gastric banding. I adopted a puppy 3 years ago, Greg. Her owner died and left 2 litters of puppies that needed to be adopted. The owner had a gastric band. She used to meticulously try to stretch her band out so that she could eat more. She ruptured her stomach, got an infection, and died. And people have done that. They've ruptured their bands. Gastric bypass, and also with a band, you're never going to be able to have that big Thanksgiving meal. That's soul food. I think we need that. So it's not a perfect solution. Gastric bypass, where they take a portion of the intestine out. I have patients that had it 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and I'm always chasing nutritional deficiencies, some of which we can't even measure for, because your small intestine is where you absorb a lot of your nutrients. So it's not always healthy. But they do work, and I understand when people are desperate. I'm sorry.
When you have the gastric banding procedure, that's not a permanent thing though, is it?
Sometimes it is, and
But
sometimes it isn't. There's different ways that they're done.
Oh, okay.
You know, basically, they've taken portions of the stomach out, they put on permanent bands, they put on temporary bands, they put things in the stomach to take up some of the volume. There's a lot of different procedures being done. I had a young patient, she was 24 years old. She had gone to Mexico and she had a gastric band procedure in Mexico laparoscopically. And she came in one day and she was infected and sick, I mean really sick. We put her in the hospital, we had to do surgery, we had to take out the band. She almost died. She came into my office 2 weeks later. She was going right back to Mexico to have it done again. And I went, you know, I mean, why? Let me work with you. Let's see what we can do.
No, I was just wondering if there's like some sort of procedure, and then like after you maintain your weight for a year or two or whatever, can you take the band off?
There are procedures like that. Like I said, some of them can be temporary. I've not seen anybody do that yet, but it's out there. Liposuction. A friend of mine's a plastic surgeon. He said he's always seen people who come in and say, "Can't you just suck the fat out?" Sounds great. I wish. But they can't. And the reason is that, number one, your fat will redistribute, excuse me. And the other is that fat is living tissue. And if you take a whole bunch of it out, you can die. It's a real stress on the body. So they can't ever do massive liposuction. You've probably all heard about people who have actually died from having that done. Intense exercise. Again, after a while, with intense exercise, your body's going to meet you calorie for calorie. We are going to get to strategies here in a minute. DHEA. Oops. We'll come back to that one. DHEA is a master hormone. It's a master hormone that's converted to your estrogen and your sex hormones and some other hormones. And when we get older, we lose DHEA and we accumulate belly fat. So if you're in your 70s, 80s, and you notice that you've been skinny your whole life, but all of a sudden you've got a belly, it's because you've lost your DHEA. However, if you take it orally, it's broken down in your liver and you don't get any of it. So until they figure out other ways to give it to you, orally doesn't seem to work. And in a few cases has been liver toxic. I've never seen it, but it basically just doesn't do a whole lot for you. Does menopause make you fat? I don't know. I mean, I'm menopausal and I'm fatter, but I think it's because I eat more. So I don't know. I used to say no, but I wonder, because we do tend to put on weight a lot of times after menopause. But I'm not sure on that. Testosterone has been touted to be, the wonder hormone that's all over the internet. But most of the time, testosterone, which has been touted to keep your lean muscle mass on, when I've supplemented people, I don't really see any change in their body composition. Starvation and euphoria. I only put that in because toward the end of life, and for any kind of animal, they stop eating. And we always want to put feeding tubes in and feed people. But actually, toward the end of life, when we start starving, we get a little bit euphoric. And if any of you have ever noticed as you're losing weight, you start getting a little bit energetic and buoyed by that. So sometimes in starvation states, we get a little euphoria. It doesn't last very long. So we die usually. Anyway, so strategies. Let's talk about that. Surfing under the radar. Do a program that's going to reduce your caloric intake about 200 calories a day. If you think you're just going to cut down or change the way you eat, just bear in mind it doesn't usually work. Okay? It's not that it might not work in you, but it doesn't usually work. And that's why there's a lot of programs out there. They all work, but remember that good nutrition is really important. So diets that are very restrictive of the types of foods that you can eat, usually long-term don't work. Why? Because of the soul food thing. Okay? So diets that are just healthy, more primitive, lean, lots of fiber, excellent for you. I do nutrition lectures too, so we won't go off a lot in that if anyone ever wants to come. Add that exercise to overcome that 20% reduction that you're going to need. That's what's going to make you successful. Exercise is going to give you instant feedback to how your lighter body works. It gives you its own euphoria. You feel good. The fat that you do have is going to be lost, and you're going to make your lean a little bit bigger, so you're going to look better, feel better, and be healthier. And remember, exercise is what's proving to be really the benefit in longevity and reduction of heart disease. Embrace back-to-earth foods. If you don't know whether you should be eating it or if it's good for you, if you were a caveman and sitting in front of your cave, would it be available if you walked out of your cave? Jump starts. Those are diets, like I talked about the dog diets, things like, where you do Jenny Craig or Nutrisystems. Those can work long term. At some point you're probably going to go off of it. But those can work. Jump starts can work. Another little strategy, remember how I said don't ever skip breakfast? You can skip dinner though. Because at night, your body, that cortisol is going down for the night. So sometimes what I do when I've eaten too much for a couple of days, or a week or two, skip a few dinners, because you won't be hungrier in the morning, you won't pay the piper for it. So you can skip dinner occasionally, just have a salad, or go home and just have liquids for dinner. Watch alcohol because it's empty calories. It actually is a very simple sugar and goes right to your bloodstream. Motivators, they looked at all kinds of motivators. Motivators can be anything from somebody paying you, putting money in the bank, saying you'll donate $500 to a charity if you don't reach your weight loss goal, buddying up with somebody. Those can work. These programs like the hospital's putting on, they can work. And then let's talk about when your body decides that it's going to meet you calorie for calorie. So when we talked a little bit ago, we talked about how when you're at a plateau, you tend to want to eat less and exercise more, and the scale still doesn't budge. Well, your body says you're starving and it's trying to defend you. How can you fool your body into thinking you're not starving? Eat more.
Or eat a little bit, right?
Well, actually, I'm a real believer in pig outs. And what I tell people when they plateau is I change their diet and I say, 1 meal a week, you can go eat whatever the heck you want. If it's 3 pieces of pizza and dessert, 1 meal a week, you get to eat whatever you want. The rest of the time, try and stay on your program. And you will, a lot of times by doing that, find that the scale starts to move again. And that's because your body just went, oh, okay, you're not starving. The woolly mammoth is here, and we're going to kick up the metabolism again. The other thing is change up your exercise routine. So I say the same time you're doing that, within a 24-hour period before or after, this is just a Paula strategy, change your exercise pattern, do something different. We've all heard about interval training. Have you heard about interval training? So intervals are, you don't just go out and march along in your fat burning zone, 85% of your max heart rate or whatever. You pick up the pace sometimes. And so if, say, you're out walking the trail, like the power line trail, I might run the uphill sections, walk the other sections, run certain sections, run with my dog for a certain part. So mix it up like that. One thing I like about the video program I do, the P90X, is every day they have you doing something different. And so what you're doing is you're confusing your muscles. Our body gets very adapted to the same sort of exercise too. So if you can mix up what you're doing, one day you do upper body, the next day maybe you do lower body, then you do kickboxing, then you do a Zumba class, then you go for a bike ride, then you go ski the bumps all day. Then you come back and you're going to do your upper body workout, but you do a different kind of exercise with your upper body workout. Mixing it up all the time and confusing your body will keep your metabolism running at a nice high level. So those are some strategies.